Welcome everyone. We see people connecting. We should be starting in the next minute. Welcome everyone. We have people from different time zones, different continents. So I can only say good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So I'm Jorge Garcia from Hello Iconic, and we're gonna have a second version of our panel, Successfully Executing MVPs and POCs, this time from a product manager's perspective. We have two wonderful panelists today, Sasha Parker from Seed and Spark, and we have Stephanie Simpson from Cyvatar. This panel and this series come from the things that we love at Hello Iconic. We focus on the areas of product design, product engineering, product management, product execution. That this is something that we love. In this panel, we are going to discuss different things. What's an MVP? What's a POC? When do you use them? How to prioritize? How to communicate well with stakeholders? How to communicate with designers and engineers? How do we pivot when we have some other signals from the market or from the business? So a lot of that is going to come in the panel. So we have registered more than 100 people. Now people are joining. We're on the 40 right away. And we have a mix of small, large startup companies. So we have people from Morgan Stanley, Chase, BNY Mellon. At the same time, we have people from startups such as Blaze, people Creator Up, and we also have some innovators and entrepreneurs joining us as well. And we have a very nice mix of backgrounds. So we have people from the areas of product management. We have people from areas we have founders, we have CTOs, directors of technologies, VPs. So I think we have a really rich mix, and hopefully we're looking forward to your questions during the panel. Make sure you can send us your questions on the Q&A section. We will be reviewing them and making sure that we can answer them as we go. And at the end of the panel, we also going to have a section for Q&A. Getting started, before getting started, we have a couple of really interesting announcements. We do this series every 2 months, but March that just ended was Women History Month. So we want to celebrate the wonderful women that we work with. We have two of them as panelists, Stephanie Simpson and Sasha Parker. But at the same time, Hannah Johnson from Neil Young Archives, Beatriz Acevedo and Mary Hernandez from Summa Wealth on the financial wellness, and Wendy Colby, very well-seasoned education CEO on Accelerate and previously on Laureate Education. At the same time, we want to celebrate the Financial Literacy Month. Two of the wonderful companies that we work with, Summa Wealth, that is focused on closing the gap on the Latino wealth, being Latinos the cohort of the population in the US that spends the most. We want to have, Summa wants to help them being also the population that saves the most. And the Change company that is focused on the community loans, what's called CRA loans and all that, a lot of innovation in that sector. So it's really important. And they're both companies are doing a wonderful job on their fields on the financial literacy and financial wealth. Cool. So getting started, we want to introduce the panelists. So we're going to give some time again, like both persons, Sasha and Stephanie, people that I personally admire. We worked really closely for many times, and it's super wonderful. But I'll let them introduce themselves. So we will start with Sasha. And Sasha, the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sasha Kai Parker, current head of product at Seed and Spark. As the slide points out, I've been in the product game for quite a while, kind of becoming a little tenure there. But I've also had the pleasure of working at a variety of companies, most recently at the Walt Disney Company. But I've also worked on the agency side. I've worked at startups, large companies and small companies as well. And I've also had the pleasure of working across a variety of products, including streaming, digital content, games, and AR, VR, mixed reality production of that content as well. I'm an accidental product manager, I like to say. I did not set out to go into product as a profession. My educational background is actually in journalism and political science, and I worked as a community organizer for a while before I actually transitioned into technology. But I like to think that a lot of those skills in terms of listening, being able to pull together sort of communities and help them execute on actions and campaigns at scale have all just helped make me more successful in my transition to working in product. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Sasha. And yeah, we will talk about that that listening and communication. I think that's going to be a super important part of the conversation today. Well, Stephanie, yeah, definitely the stage is yours.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Stephanie Simpson. I am currently Director of Product Management for Cyvatar, and we are the industry's first membership-based cybersecurity as a service company that combines expert advisors, proven technologies, and also strategic solutions. And we guarantee remediation and results for our members. I'm also on the board of advisors for another startup, Spintel, which offers the only real-time SaaS music platform in the industry and the only music CRM solution available today. I have a mechanical engineering degree, but never really used it. I've been creating disruptive software for over 20 years. I specialize in software as a service and data intensive software using AI/ML. I spent a lot of those years in consulting at companies very similar to Hello Iconic. And I've been working with Hello Iconic since October when I started at Cyvatar, and they are by far the best company I have ever worked with in product design and development.
I love that. Thank
you.
I
thought you would like that. Yeah. I'm telling the truth, though.
Yeah. Awesome. No, thank you. Thank you. Well, I will be your host. I'm Jorge Garcia. I'm one of the founders and CTO of Hello Iconic. I come from an entrepreneurial background, had a startup, a couple of startups actually, some that failed, some that worked. So a combination of that. And we've been working with Hello Iconic. We've been 10 plus years in the field, doing products for multiple companies, Disney, ABC on the large scale size, and also many startups, well successful. Cyvatar, for example, it's a good example of them. And yeah, so we are doing things on the financial wealth, education, and multiple of that. Yeah, and a little bit of Hello Iconic. We love to make digital products. That's something that we have done. The founders, Alejandro and I, we've been 20 plus years in the field, come from a technical background, and now doing in the business side. We have created platforms and helped create platforms for millions of users worldwide. And that's what we love to do and love to help both entrepreneurs and companies. Something that it's important is that we help solutions that scale. So basically scaling startups such as Cyvatar or Fortune 500s, as Disney, as the Viacoms of the world. We have deep expertise on certain areas. So entertainment, especially streaming, we do a lot of that. Education technology, we work with University of Maryland. We're recently working with a couple of startups, Accelerate, Sintana, that is working also with the Azusa University. So Arizona State University. So we are doing a lot on the ed tech. On the fintech, we're also doing a lot. And this is actually one of our strongest and growing areas of expertise. And blockchain also, we're working with a couple of startups on the blockchain world, Poly Games, Turnio, and such. Something that is important is we help you with the execution side of things. So we are strategy, but actually a lot of that is execution. And something that is super, super important is that we also always have somebody from the leadership working closely with you, which I think we like that because it brings a lot of value, and we love to do this. So I think that's super important. A couple of areas that we work with, it's product strategy, engineering and design, which is our muscle, and then data science and research, very focused on growth. So innovation and growth on products. And we love this area, and the subject of this webinar is PoCs and MVPs. And I think that goes to the fact that we work in different areas. When you are discovering a solution, so we help you with that process. And then also when, so we help you with what do you want to build? Do we do experiments and proof of concepts? And then after that, we have a very solid process as well on just, okay, let's do the Scrum and execute flawlessly. So we have that combination. And then, yeah, a couple of brands that we work with, Disney, Suma, Ternio, etc. Cobus, the French high definition audio, Neil Young Archives. So we'll see a combination of the products that we do and the companies that we work with. But yeah, like this, we're gonna stop the. We didn't come to talk about Hello Iconic as much, and it's more about learning, understanding from Stephanie and Sasha and their experience on the creation of products and successfully executing proof of concepts and minimum viable products. So we have this image for starters, so I saw it on Twitter a couple of months ago, and actually we used this on the previous version of the webinar. But I would love to get your take there. And it's basically how not to build a minimum viable product, or how to build a minimum viable product. So yeah, I would like to start with you, Stephanie, and hear what do you take from this image? Like, what is a minimum viable product, and what's a proof of concept? Yeah, so let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love this image. It shows, especially the bottom is how to build it, right? So in order to build a minimum viable product, you have to start with the basics. And really what's important is that you start with something that's manual. As long as you can get the product out, and it may not be perfect, it may not be automated, but you start getting it out quickly, and then you get to market, you can continue to automate and enhance the UI as you go. But the most important thing is prioritizing what is of most value to the customer at that point in time.
And Sasha, what do you take from this image? We'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of what Stephanie said, right? The goal of a minimum viable product is so we can launch, learn, and iterate based on real customer feedback. Something that I've learned in my experience as well is that customers and our end users are becoming increasingly sophisticated in their uses of technology. And so I know there's a school of thought that's saying like a minimum viable product should have all of our nice to haves, but I also think there's a conversation around need to haves in those products as well, because you want to make sure that you have the base functionality that users are expecting, and that sometimes includes features that may not necessarily be the minimum scope for your product, but they're just table stakes. And that's something we saw in some of the streaming products that I worked on at Disney is, when I started, there were some key features that were not in the product themselves. And because of users' familiarity with other streaming apps like Netflix, like YouTube, like Hulu, they were expecting these features and these functionalities to be there. And so just getting our product up to table stakes for what is the minimum expectation of a streaming platform was one of my big priorities when I first started there.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, now we're starting to get into topic, and Stephanie, you did mention a little bit of launching early, and working with Salvatore. One of the things that I remember when we started working together was, so we had discussed and there was this plan. So we did a proof of concept, and then we're basically having a roadmap. Okay, when do we launch the MVP? And some of the things that I think was a bold decision and a wise decision, and it was you. And I asked Craig on our previous webinar, and he was like, yeah, that was Stephanie. So we'd love to hear your perspective on this, because you basically said, yeah, no, let's launch, and we pivoted the plan, and we launched the first version. So we'd love to hear your thought process there, and how that worked for you.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, I started at Cyvatar in October, and the first plan was to wait and launch something big in January, and then another big launch in March. But I quickly looked at our goals, and our goals at that time were to build pipeline. So what I did was look at all of our priorities and said, how can we launch when ready? How can we start with what we have and continue to build on that, so that we're helping to build that pipeline? When I worked with Hello Iconic, they quickly were able to pivot, and we started with our first launch in November, and then launched 3 launches by January, when originally we were going to do the first in January. My philosophy is that there's really no need to wait. If you have something for your customers of value, you should develop it, and you should be able to create small enough launches that you can continuously launch over and over again to give more and more to your customers.
And I know a little bit because of the team. I discussed with them that you're actually moving to a plan of every week launching a new feature, that it just feels like it's constantly improving, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we might as well not hold those back from the customer. But when we do a big marketing launch, we can wait a month or 2 and gather up a whole bunch of features and then launch it. But yeah, weekly is wonderful.
Interesting that you are mentioning something that it's really interesting, separating the marketing launch from the actual launch. It's like you can, based on what I hear, you're saying you can still do the big launch on the marketing side, but that doesn't prevent you from actually launching continuously on the product side. And then you just gather, and it's like, hey, you actually launch all this to the public, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And what that gives, you already have an existing customer base. So, or maybe not, but once you grow an existing customer base, if you launch when ready, that customer base gets a little head start, right? They're able to get these new features, and you can, hopefully as a product manager, you're talking to your customers, and you're giving them, early access so that they give feedback, and sometimes beta testing, things like that. When you launch to the public, that's when you start getting new customers. So that's the time when you need to put together a full marketing plan and talk to the new customer about what's so great, or prospect, and get them to come in. So that's
Awesome.
how we do it.
Thank you. Sasha, and still talking about this on the launching, one of the things that I always admire was at Disney, you were in charge of a lot of platforms. So you were in charge of Roku, Fire TV, Chromecast, like a lot of things at the same time. So and actually we got to a pipeline of launching pretty frequently as well. So we'd love to hear your perspective on that, on launching frequently, but at the same time managing all those platforms at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, even though the number of platforms we were on was large, one of the things that really helped us was getting a lot of our platforms up to parity in terms of features across the board. And so I think that helps keep it manageable. So it's not that we're managing all of these separate apps, but generally the functionality, the feature set is the same across some of them. And then when we were looking to innovate, just trying to identify the platforms that might be best suited for the types of innovation that we were looking to do. I agree with Stephanie. I think that there's no reason why you can't do incremental iterative releases to update features and functionality on the platform, and then save some things for that big shiny marketing release. One of the things that I like to say is, like, in product, when we think of innovation, a lot of times we get trapped in innovation with a capital I, and that is like the big shiny marketing release, the new set of features, the big thing that you're rolling out. But, good products are constantly innovating, incrementally, and even if it's something small, like improvements to search, getting faster page load times, reducing the number of steps that it takes for someone to get into the core action, that is all innovation in a way. And I don't think that, I think both of those things are incredibly valuable and should kind of be weighed, weighed equally sometimes. And I know we often have a lot of inputs coming in from the business, from other stakeholders, but that's also our job as product managers, is to kind of push back a little bit and say, yes, we can accomplish all of these things, but really we need to make sure that we're driving towards making this a great experience for our end users, while encapsulating some of these larger things. And so with a portfolio at Disney, it was a lot of that. It was a lot of a balancing act, and kind of identifying the platforms that were best suited for kind of looking at these future facing things. When we were testing new features, sort of like the rewards loyalty program, Freeform Nonstop, we didn't roll that all out at once. We kind of identified the platform. I believe it was tvOS. It's been a while, so feel free to correct me.
Yeah.
But I believe it was tvOS where
Yeah,
we saw like that platform, just in terms of data and the behavioral insights that we had, they tended to be more early adopters. They tended to be a little more technologically savvy than some of our other platforms. And so the footprint there was also a little smaller. So we were able to roll out that feature first there, get some actionable insights, and then revamp the program before we rolled it out, everywhere else. But it is a balancing act, I think, in terms of being on top of how you're prioritizing, being in communication with your customers, knowing those nuances between the different platforms or product lines that you're managing, and knowing that everything isn't always for everyone. Sometimes you need to kind of take that rolled out iterative approach and keep moving forward.
So, Sasha, interesting you say that. So when working with Hello Iconic, we had one Scrum team in the beginning when we started, and quickly started to realize that after our first launch, we wanted to basically split up the team to have a continuous improvement Scrum team and then a new features Scrum team. And I'm continuously saying to the continuous improvement team, we have to come up with a new name for this team, because this is the most important team. You guys are continuously improving based on what our customers are saying, what we're, feedback, and we're launching great things in the continuous improvement team. It's not that they're not, everything we're doing is new, but it's based on an initial launch, right? So then, and we continuously evolve over time with that team. And then the other team takes a little longer, right? Like it may take, because we have to do the design and then the development. So we're like a sprint ahead with the design. So that team is, not as stressed probably as the continuous improvement team.
Totally. I actually found it's an interesting insight that you both take from two different perspectives. So one of the things that you mentioned, Sasha, was separate, like basically you were able to manage it because you basically had all the platforms that are similar. And I've seen like on the streaming side, a lot of companies divide by technology. So they have the Android developer and the Fire TV developer, and that's the same Scrum team. And then the product manager handles that. But actually the cognitive load must be super heavy because you're doing a mobile version and an OTT version at the same time. So splitting, and I remember that it was mobile on one side and then OTT on the other side. And then Stephanie, on another angle, the fact of splitting also the team into the continuous innovation, and then at the same time the new features on the big innovation. And as you're mentioning, yeah, that the continuous improvement doesn't sound that
I think
sexy.
We're going to change it. I think we're going to change it to continuous innovation. I like it. We're going to do that.
Awesome.
I made that up a new name.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a super interesting insight, because how do you manage those? How do you balance that continuous plus the new features? And I've seen many companies and teams struggle with this, and just the structure and making sure that you split the team sounds like a super smart and interesting way of doing it. I want to touch a little bit about the proof of concepts and POCs, and Sasha, I'm going to start with you there. And one of the things that I remember, and we were discussing on the previous on the preparation, was the strategy for Roku. So I remember there was the idea of doing a major overhaul of the platform, and you decided I want to do a POC first. So we'd like to hear your thought about that, like what guided you to that, and also related to that, how do you know when a POC is successful? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of comes back to definitions, right? So for me, a POC is proving feasibility, right? Technical feasibility, concept feasibility at some degree. But for us, when we were talking about moving onto the Roku platform, we had already known that there was a huge subset of users there. We did not have an app there. And so because of that, I had a gut instinct that was basically saying like, hey, if we just show up, we are going to attract users. And there was some debate around that just because our OTT portfolio had been so large at the time, adding on an additional platform, spinning up a new team with a new, knowledge of this code base. There were a lot of things to work out in that situation, and you all were amazing just in terms of like, hey, let's look into this and see, like, can we get a proof of concept of what a Roku app would look like given our existing UI and the other OTT streaming experiences. And that happened so quickly. I think it was like 3 weeks or something we had a proof of concept. The other thing that was also happening during this time was that we were also doing a full scale redesign of our website, OTT apps, and our mobile apps based on some usability testing and some other data that we were looking at the time. And so we kind of were in this place where, do we wait and launch once we have all of these things redesigned and shiny and new? Or do we just go ahead and put up an app so we can get people acquainted with the fact that Freeform is now on Roku? You can come here and stream your content. And we ultimately chose to do the latter. So you guys were, again, amazing in terms of just getting up an app that had parity with our existing OTT platforms. And that was there for a while. And then we ended up moving to a fully redesigned version, I think. I mean, basically within a year, we launched 3 different apps on Roku for one experience. And I think for us, the value of just being there, because there was such a huge amount of users and being there quickly, we just needed to do that. And there was really no need to wait. I thought actually we were hurting ourselves more by not being in that space. Yeah. And so getting the app up and getting it up quickly with minimum functionality was, paramount at that time, I think. And then, obviously we did a larger, shinier redesign and release later. But for us, that was, and I think Roku turned out to be our largest streaming platform. Yeah. Very quickly, it started to dwarf all of our other platforms just by virtue of us making that first step and making a decision to get on board with the platform.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that was an interesting year for sure. Now that I remember about it, and just closing this section, I would love to hear both your thoughts on how do you prioritize? Like, how do you? Yeah, you touch a little bit, Sasha, about like what's a proof of concept to you, but in general, how do you prioritize what goes in and what doesn't go into both the POC or an MVP, or even like your next release? We'd love to hear both your thoughts. I don't know who wants to start first.
I can start. Yeah, it's a really good question in terms of prioritization. So the most important job that a product manager has is prioritization. You kind of call it an art of prioritization. But you take this company vision and cascade it down to the product vision and the roadmap, and then every single feature launch should be aligned and prioritized with the business goals, customer goals, and then also look at it from a technical or operational complexity. When you have that prioritized backlog based on those four things, and your company goals change, which probably happens more often for a startup than a larger corporation, you should be prioritizing over and over again on a regular basis. It's not if someone will change your priorities, it will happen. And so you need to be very flexible, but also when someone comes to you and says, hey, this is a priority, we need to add this now, need to be able to push back and say, absolutely, let's add it to the backlog, and let's see how this should be prioritized amongst all of our other priorities of value.
Awesome. Sasha, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I agree. I think I wish I could say that there was a very nice formulaic approach to how I handle prioritization, but it is a little bit of alchemy, you know, like you are taking all of these different, sometimes conflicting priorities, and trying to ultimately decide what is going to result in the biggest bang for your users, your end users buck, essentially. And I think, you know, for me, one of the things that I like to encourage is that your delivery teams need to be nimble and they really need to be agile, because as Stephanie said, like, it's not a matter of if your priorities are going to change, it is when. And sometimes those things are, you know, need to be acted on incredibly quickly. Sometimes you have the opportunity to kind of put it in the backlog, think through it, prioritize it against other things. But I have been in situations where, you know, it comes down like, hey, this law went into effect and we have to have all of this stuff done by the end of the month. And so it's like, well, there goes that roadmap. So now we're doing this now. But also, I am a firm believer in transparency. And so in those situations, you know, being transparent with my team, being transparent with my stakeholders, managing those expectations, I think also helps a lot in terms of being able to have those open conversations about priorities. And I think just it gives you a great relationship to work with, because one of the big things as well is just trust. You want to have the trust from your stakeholders that your team can deliver and execute on this product vision. You want to have the trust from your delivery teams that as a product owner or product manager, you know, you are kind of prioritizing the things and the features that are going to keep them invested in the platform. And, you know, kind of in my case, I've always liked to try to push the envelope a little bit, and make some bold choices. And I think, you know, the more institutional credibility, if you will, that you can build up through those transparent conversations, through managing those expectations, I think it assists with the priority, especially when you're in a situation where you're like, hey, I understand this is important. It's in our backlog, but we also have these, you know, 5 other things that we really need to get out the door first.
Awesome. And actually, I'm going to use that answer to segue to our second topic, which is more about the communication. And you did mention a little bit about transparency, trust. So I'll stay with you, Sasha, and would ask you, like, what do you think are key ingredients for communication, both for strategy and execution, both for stakeholders and the team?
One, I think expectation setting across the board. You know, a lot of the frustration that I think everyone feels in their day-to-day is you go into a situation expecting it to be one way, and then it turns out to be something else. And so the better that you can manage your expectations or manage the expectations of stakeholders in those situations, just sort of alleviates some of that unnecessary stress that may be trickling down and through. You know, I touched on transparency. I think that's a big thing as well. But for me also, it's making sure that we are clear about how we are defining success and what are those metrics that we are using to measure that. You know, a lot of times, and sometimes they're not always hard metrics, right? Like sometimes they're soft metrics, right? Like we're getting a lot of positive reviews in the App Store or something like that, right? But it's still something that we can track against and say, was this successful? Was it not? Because I think, especially if you're launching an MVP or a proof of concept, you want to have a clear way to track your efforts back to your deliverables, back to something measurable. And if you can't do that, it becomes sort of this arbitrary conversation of, well, was this successful? From marketing's perspective, it wasn't a success, or from the business perspective, it wasn't a success, but technically it was a great success. And you don't really want to be in those situations where you're trying to define success after the fact. I think that's helpful. And then another thing for me as well is just making sure that we know who the stakeholders are and having the right stakeholders at the table. Sometimes, especially in larger organizations, there can be a lot of people that need to weigh in before decisions are rolling out. This was something, that we ran into at Disney quite a bit, where we had these very large groups of stakeholders from different disciplines all throughout the company. And one of the ways that I tried to work within that system was really just looking at making sure that I knew clearly who was the person that needed to weigh in, who was the person that could sign off. If they weren't the same person, how do we get those people both at the table and get them the information that they need? A big thing for stakeholder management, honestly, and something that I try to remember is, what do they need to know, or what do they need to believe to act, right? So what does this person need to believe about the product that we are launching? What are we doing? The team that we have, what do they need to believe to have the confidence and trust to make a decision? And then getting people to make those decisions a lot of times in the room, because sometimes it's with the speed at which we move, sometimes it's very difficult to do follow-ups. And so just making sure it's like, hey, how do you feel? Let's check in. Awesome. Okay, so what do you need? Can we make a decision today? It's a little bit of sales, right? Like you're kind of closing in a way. Do you have what you need? Do you feel like we can kind of make this decision? Can we move forward? If not, what are those unknowns that still need to be addressed in that way?
I
So
love
Sasha,
it.
go ahead.
No, we love. Yeah, I was going to
Oh,
ask.
yeah,
I would love
I
to
was
hear
going to
your
say that
take on
I
it.
can relate to what you're saying. I came from a larger corporation, but it is different in the startup world, right? In terms of communication, you can get things done much quicker. This is the similarity, right? It starts with aligning on the company strategy, everyone understanding what the core values are, the purpose of the big, hairy, audacious goal, your brand promise, and then most importantly, what the KPIs are. And then cascading from there into the targets, right? What are we supposed to be doing the next 3 to 5 years? What are the KPIs and key initiatives that we all need to do in order to reach those goals? And then tactically, really looking at, okay, how does my team, the product team, align to all of what I just talked about? And so, working very iteratively with cross-functional teams, the customers, the sales, marketing, delivery, third parties like Hello Iconic, and to create that best experience to align with the goals. And in order to do that, there's certain meetings that need to happen, right? There's certain, all the agile ceremonies have to happen, right? Daily stand-ups, internal and external meetings for that, backlog grooming sessions, sprint planning, sprint demos, retrospectives, all those things that, everyone who has an agile background knows that those are really important in terms of making sure that that communication is happening. And then on the other side, though, with those other stakeholders that aren't in those ceremonies, having similar, but not as many, you don't want too many meetings, but making sure that they understand, what and agree with the goals that that you've put forth out to your team. I also, in general, really put a lot of focus on the team itself, right? so that everyone loves what they're doing. And so the communication comes not just about me telling what I want someone to do, or me listening, but also celebrating. So we have a wins channel at Savitar where, you know, every single win that someone has is posted there, and we give like 3 or 4 a day, and it's either, it could come from product, it could come from sales, it could come from marketing, it could come from operations, but that communication of wins also creates that really nice environment, and then it motivates people, right? We also, in terms of communication and outside of those agile ceremonies, we review our KPIs every day with our team. So we know how sales is doing compared to their goals, how marketing is doing compared to their goals, how product is doing compared to their goals, how delivery is done. And we're very transparent and communicative about those KPIs. And then in terms of communication, I said this before, but always inviting ideas from anywhere. I never say no. I love ideas. Sometimes I have to say, let me just add that to the backlog and we can prioritize it. But, you know, making someone feel like they can always come to me with an idea is my biggest thing for communication.
Yeah, I will say listening is such a huge part of it, and not just listening to what people are saying, but also what they aren't saying. Right. I think it's Steve Jobs. I'm going to butcher this quote, so I'm just going to paraphrase. Basically, if you ask people what they want, they won't be able to tell you, but they can tell you what's wrong, essentially. Yeah. And so if you are engaged in that conversation, if you are inviting, if you're curious, I think that is one of the things that I always look for in PMs when I'm hiring is like, are you a curious person? Are you going to ask why? Or, you know, just that sort of line of thinking, because I think that is how you get to good features, good products, even just good conversations and relationships with your team, with your stakeholders, just always sort of being curious about the why and the behavior that's actually driving these asks. So listening is a huge part of that.
Yep.
I'm gonna actually use a question from the public that is, I think it's super relevant. It's an anonymous question, so I cannot give credit to the person, but the question is, what tools have you found effective? And I remember we discussed this also a little bit on the prep. What tools and artifacts do you think are effective in communicating with both designers and engineers, for example? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And Stephanie, maybe we start with you, and then
yeah, absolutely. You know, tools, so you can have too many tools, that's for sure. But in software, I feel like it's a necessary evil, right? I mean, there's no way to create software without tools. So I think of it in 2 ways. One, the tools that I use daily with Hello Iconic, right? So my design and development team, we communicate through Slack on a regular basis, so that they can get a hold of me ASAP. And we use Jira for the backlog, and obviously that's between product management and then also design and development. We use Figma for prototyping, and really just me being able to see the designs and give feedback on a regular basis. I'm a huge proponent of just show me something now. I don't need it to be perfect. Get my feedback. Don't wait till it's perfect before that. So then actually Hello Iconic switched to Figma because it was actually easier for them than Zeppelin. And then Whimsical for similar, but it's more for the wireframing. Again, the same thing I said about Figma. So, you know, getting that feedback as soon as possible. I actually use Miro first, and I create what I call ugly wireframes. And they're ugly on purpose because I'm not trying to design. I'm just trying to get my the gist of the idea out. We review that, and then that's when Hello Iconic takes it and puts it into Whimsical, so that they take my ugly wireframes and make them much better and much more functional. Internally, so that's the tools I use, just with Hello Iconic. And then internally, we're using Office 365. OneDrive is important. We use Asana, which overlaps a little bit with Jira, but what's great about it is that you can create your backlog and everything in there, but then you can also manage tasks. And again, I know you can do all this in Jira, but it's a little bit easier when you're doing just project management type stuff within a company and across everything. And it's not specifically software driven. So we use that a lot. We use Salesforce all the time, all day, every day. It's really our database of every single piece of information we know. So that's where all of our KPIs sit. And when we review in the mornings, we're pulling our KPIs from there, and everyone has access to that information. And then the last tool that I use a lot and still use and probably will always use is spreadsheets. I haven't found a way to not use spreadsheets for things that are kind of custom to our business, and we need to be able to pull things in from other places into a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Awesome. Sasha, any additions there? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we use Jira. Jira is like a pretty consistent industry standard. I also think, though, that sometimes Jira can be overwhelming for people, especially if they are like at a startup level, and they may not necessarily be familiar with the functionality, or there are too many functions in there and they're not sure how to use them. So in terms of picking tools, I always say look for the one that has the right amount of functionality for what you need, without being overwhelming, because I think there is also a tendency to, like Stephanie said, have too many tools or kind of have things kind of put in too many places. We use Slack at Seed and Spark to have constant communication. We're also, we have a platform that we use called Coda, which sort of serves as our company documentation / wiki. All of our goals for all of the teams across the company are there and present. So we can kind of check in, and we're checking in quarterly with that. We also use it in terms of just creating transparency between teams as well. So my goal there is to kind of get trackers set up where it's like, hey, these are the high priority issues that we're working on. And so people don't have to ping me or ping the engineers about it. It's just like, hey, go to the tracker. And then let's see, we use Airtable as well to handle some of our workflow. And then for road mapping, one of the things that I know, again, like this could be handled in Jira, but RoadMonk is a very useful tool for road mapping. It has some problems, but I think, if your roadmap isn't constantly changing, and that is helpful to have that exist. There's also a platform that I'm pretty fond of called Product Plan, which also allows you to do some road mapping as well in a little more of a visual way. But I think, again, with tools, it's just picking the right tool for the team and the circumstances that you need. And sometimes there is a tendency to try to make Jira do everything. And it's a great platform, but it's not quite a Swiss Army knife in that way, So it does have its limitations. And I think, if there are things that are creating more friction, or if it's slowing your team down from accomplishing their goals, then maybe that's not the right tool for your team. And that's fine. You can be tool agnostic. You can also write product requirements in Notepad if you want to. I mean, you can do wireframes on a napkin if you want to, right? Like Jack White plays with very inexpensive guitars, and it's not the caliber of the guitar that makes him a great guitar player, right? It's the skills that he's bringing to it. So that's kind of how I think about it. If you have those skills, you really can be tool agnostic.
Yeah, that's interesting, Sasha. So I forgot two of the tools that we used after you went through your list. Well, one I already mentioned was Asana, but actually not only tracks it's very similar to Jira to be able to track a backlog and tasks and things like that. It also, you can create roadmaps in it. So I really like that tool for that. The other thing is all of our goals. So the cascading of goals, everything I was telling you about, that's all sitting in a line. And basically it's a one-page strategic plan that we review on a quarterly basis. We actually just had our QBR this morning. So I don't know how I forgot that tool, because I literally spent on it 3 hours on it today.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great one.
Awesome. We have a lot of questions from the audience, and I think they're great. So I'm going to start shooting some of those questions. Let me just see. I'll start with Debbie Caballero. So her question is like, how do you prioritize features that are paid and are paid? And she's basically mentioning like those that are like super, like it's something, a new feature that it's paid, it's going to generate revenue, versus some other things that are more just like an improvement internally. Like just how do you prioritize that?
Yeah, I can start. So I think that's why I switched over to continuous improvements and new features to the 2 different Scrum teams for that. Because some of those, I think this is what you're saying in terms of unpaid, some of those features are technical debt. You know, you've sent something, because I've said, I need this out today. Well, and I don't think that's ever happened, but I think, at least this week. And so, of course, there's going to be technical debt behind that, right? They're not going to have created something that's totally scalable in 1 week of time. So those things have to go into continuous improvements. And in terms of priority, my team just tells me, the Hello Iconic team tells me, these things need to be prioritized. Okay.
Awesome.
I mean, absolutely. You know what you need in terms of technical debt. I'm just going to tell you what other priorities I have, and we'll fit them in. That's how we do it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just making sure that you are planning to address technical debt. I think there's just that's a tomorrow problem. That's a tomorrow problem. But one day, tomorrow will be today, and everything will, all of those chickens will come home to roost. And so when I was working with Hello Iconic, one of the things that we tried to do every sprint is make sure that we held a certain number of story points to address technical debt. And then sometimes we would just do releases to address that. In the question, something else that it got me thinking about paid versus unpaid is I think a lot of times too, if you do have a paid subscriber model, there tends to be a focus on, well, these features are driving revenue, and so therefore they take priority over these other things. And I think just personally, that's kind of annoying to me, because I think you have a tendency to really disenfranchise a group of your users. And if you can justify those features in terms of conversion, are these features helping to convert free users to paid users? Kind of tying it back to what are those KPIs that are actually helping drive decisions forward. So if you know that revenue is one of them, look at how the things that you're doing on the unpaid side can actually contribute to that. And conversion is a big one, right? Like you have a funnel, you're getting people in through a freemium model. Not all of those people convert. Why aren't those people converting? And if you can come up with features or prioritize your roadmap so that you're looking at that as a metric and showing directly that the work that your team is doing is contributing to that overall, that changes the conversation versus just saying like, well, we need to do this. So just thinking again about like, how are we making this actionable against the goals and the objectives that we have as a business, as a product team.
I love that. Sasha, you marked one of the questions, another anonymous question, and how do you deal with analysis paralysis with your team, and how do you get them, and even like personally, like how do you get out of analysis paralysis? Yeah, on product.
Yes, I will apologize. My French bulldog is sitting here snoring very loudly, so if you all hear him,
I've been hearing it's almost like we have music going in the background.
A lot of times I think analysis paralysis comes from the fact that there's too much data and not enough of it is actionable. A lot of times there's a tendency to just tag everything and be like, okay, well, we're tracking this, we're tracking that. But I think you actually need to be intentional about the behaviors that you're trying to track and the things that you're trying to understand about your users. And so when I have been in situations where our team is sort of in that analysis paralysis where they're trying to figure it out, I always like to take a step back and come up a level and say, all right, let's go back to our whys. Let's go back to, again, like, why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to understand? And then use that to reorient the conversation. And it's a balance between, you know, seeing the forest and having that 30,000 foot view from above. And as a product manager, I feel like that really is our job, is to kind of negotiate that high level vision against that tactical execution on the day to day. And so it's a skill that you have to work at. But I think a lot of times, if you're spending too much time trying to decide on the right thing to do, maybe the right thing is step away and you know, step away, take a step back, or move the conversation up a level and see if we can see something different that we're missing.
So to add to that, I think that the two things that I've noticed about analysis paralysis, one, time boxing something, right? So, you know, putting some sort of time limit on what it is, right? So for instance, a lot of the analysis paralysis might happen just in the design period. Well, if you give them a sprint to figure it out, then that's the time they have. And so that's one thing. The other thing is sometimes if it's taking a really long time in analysis, then the requirement is too big. And so breaking that down into smaller stories so that you can solve part of it at a time. And then you're not continuing, you know, getting to a point. And I do this all the time with Hello Iconic. I'll be in a meeting with them. They'll you know, Claudia puts wireframes in front of me based on my ugly wireframe boards. And then she asks me all these questions, and I'm like, you know what, we're gonna table this one, because you know, I already see that this is gonna take too long. And so we're gonna put that in the backlog. Let's just focus on this one, you know. And she's asking great questions. It's just that I already know it's gonna take longer than the time I want. So
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's a great point, Stephanie. Like, if something is taking a lot of time, right? Like, it's probably because it's not scoped correctly, or it's too big of a chunk of work. And not being afraid to like have that conversation of saying like, hey, we need to like table this and come back to it, and you know, for the sake of moving forward. That's awesome.
Awesome. So many great questions. I think we are basically on time. So I would just love to hear like some final thoughts from each of you about successful execution and our discussion. So yeah, I would love to start with you, Stephanie, and then you, Sasha. 30 seconds.
I wasn't prepared for this. Okay, so I think, you know, what comes down to successful execution is obviously getting your priorities straight, having real transparency from all stakeholders, making sure you have really strong KPIs, and then just have a cadence, right, of meetings, a structure that is happening with your stand-ups, with whatever it is, and it's happening in sprints. It's every single sprint is the same cadence.
Awesome, thank you, Sasha.
Yeah, echoing a lot of what Stephanie said, consistency is just a big one, right? Like having consistent releases, getting your team consistent in a certain sort of sprint cadence. I know sometimes, especially with less experienced startup teams or new sprint teams or new teams rather, there's a tendency to kind of like try to change a bunch of things at once to help increase velocity. And I think, you know, I don't know if any of you have ever done that, the sprint exercise where it's sort of like you get two people on the side and you're trying to move an object from one side to the other. And then a lot of teams will reorient afterwards and they're not actually getting faster. And the teams that just kind of stick with, okay, just keep moving it, and eventually the process will get faster. So I think that is one thing, is just like commit to a sprint cadence, commit to a meeting schedule, commit to a release schedule. And it doesn't have to be incredibly fast. You know, a lot of times people are pushing towards a 1 week sprint release, or, you know, things like that. And it's very advanced and it's hard to do and keep track of. So just, I think consistency and commitment are also the two things that I will add to your success.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Trust, communication, consistency, commitment. I love all those from you, Stephanie and Sasha. Well, thank you, everyone. I think it feels like we need another hour. So maybe we do a follow-up. But yeah, thank you, everyone. Sasha, Stephanie, thank you for being here. Here's the contact information if you want to reach out Sasha, if you want to reach out Stephanie, if you want to contact me. Here are our LinkedIn's. Also, Jorge at helloiconic.com. Yeah, if you want to contact me directly. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to be publishing this on our website, and we're going to send you the videos automatically via Zoom, and also through our mailing list. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.